Okay, I think it's time. 10 a.m. Eastern. Good morning. Oh, first of all, Happy New Year to everyone. Welcome to Indoor Ag Science Cafe. I'm Chair Kubota, professor at the Ohio State University, the first cafe of the year. So it's always exciting. So just going through a quick, overview. If you are new to this cafe, we have been doing 6 years probably now, initially focusing on indoor vertical farms and now expanded scope and then supported by three organization or three project teams. One is OptimIA, which is the original one, working on the leafy greens production in indoor vertical farm conditions. Second group is Advanced CEA, which is more engineering, data-driven, AI-based climate management and crop management. The third group is CEA herbs, that is working on culinary herb production under controlled environment. So three groups are all funded by USDA NIFA, Specialty Crop Research Initiative. So it makes sense to do integrated effort to this outreach activities. The purpose of this cafe is to provide science-based information or data-supported information so that more calibrated information, I would say, available for growers and professionals, and then like to create this as learning platform for everyone. So that's why we are doing monthly, usually 11 a.m. Eastern, but this time we had to adjust slightly to accommodate speakers schedule. So just wanted to do a quick advertisement of the Advanced EA group. This is starting January 9. So this week, Thursday, we are teaching 2 lectures a week. 14 weeks. This is a massive amount of information to learn sensors and control, which probably not easily available in your curriculum if you are in school, or you may already, finish all the education looking for the additional training. It's online course and an asynchronous and live. You can do either way. But we still accept the registration, I believe. So if you wanted to take this, it's not free, but if you wanted to take this, please access to this Advanced EA page and go to the event page to find the registration. If you can't find the link, let me know and then I can send you the link. Or maybe if Kari is in the um, audience, maybe she can send the link in the chat. All right. So thank you very much. So yeah, so today is the state of industry by Advanced EA, truths behind the data, and then the special speakers duo is Dr. Guil Signorini from the Ohio State University and Chris Higgins, HortAmericas. They are both familiar with the current status of CEA. And then I wanted to have them so that they can have this discussion. Everyone knows that, CEA industry is dynamically changing, and then that's why we wanted to have this opportunity. So we have upcoming cafe still available, and I'm working on that scheduling, but I know one more sort of marketing business type of talk. Dr. Alicia Ling from University of Tennessee on April 29th. So something you look forward. We are doing monthly again. All right, the format of this, okay, so next one. The format of this, the first part presentation is going to be recorded and shared in the archive page. I think I missed to mention the archive page in OptimIA event page. So it will be available from there. And then after that, we get Q&A, and that Q&A portion is not going to be recorded so that you can say technically anything. Um, so hold the questions until Q&A if you will, and then recording can be done. All right. So with that, I'd like to have the main presenter, Guil Signorini, and then the co-presenter, Chris Higgins, um, take over this. I stop sharing.
So, Cherry, thanks for the introduction. It's a pleasure to me to kick off the Indoor Ag Science Café in 2025. So, first presentation of the year, a very important topic at hand. I must say that I love being part of this team, this group, multidisciplinary group in its essence, right? So we all cover different topics, different materials, um, and examine the problems the industry face from multiple angles, from different angles. And I understand that most of us in this audience, in this group, like to discuss the technical aspects of producing crops under production. But we also need to take care and take into consideration marketing aspects, sales aspects, strategies, marketing developments, dynamics between countries, and that's what we have here. That's what we prepared for today's conversation. So I know that we are switching gears, changing topics a little bit, but the multidisciplinary aspect of this team allows us to do that. And I'm biased to say I think we should look at marketing and market dynamics with the same level of attention and strategies for that matter, the same level of attention that we pay to technical aspects of production per se. So without further ado, I will jump into the conversation. Chris is you are with me in this in this talk, please.
I'm along for the ride.
All right. Yeah, please interrupt me at any time. If we can use Cherry's protocol, save all the questions to the end. But this is a cafe, right? So let's take advantage of this. I think the industry needs more open, friendly conversations to enrich the discussions for the benefit of us all, not only research-wise, but also in the decision-making aspect in the industry.
Okay, I think that's a great suggestion. So I like to suggest if you are okay to be recorded, feel free to interrupt or, some clarification questions. I think it's perfectly okay to be recorded. So I encourage you guys to use microphone to ask questions. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so let's do that way. Thank you. Thank
Yeah,
you,
it's
Yeah.
Tim.
it's it's
In
it's a
addition,
cafe setting, right?
yeah. In addition, if you want to post your questions in the chat room while Gil's giving the presentation or when he's giving the presentation, I'll watch and monitor the questions in the chat area.
Excellent suggestion. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
So let me jump into the material I prepared for you guys this morning. Why my slides not going? Okay, it flips slides, right?
Yep.
Cool. So here's a quick outline of today's talk, right? So I would like to start with this recent study from Wageningen University called Locations for Highest Potential Greenhouse Development in the World. I found this study very, very useful, but at the same time, I finished the article, the paper, with kind of mixed feelings. Okay, there are certain unanswered questions here that I think would be appropriate to complement, to add value to whatever to what they produced in this document. So we will start by highlighting certain aspects of what they did in the study, highlighting some of their results, and then try to complement them with some additional facts that we bring here. So with that, we complement the analysis, looking more specifically into demand and sales trends, production trends in the United States, and international trade, primarily here in North America. So looking at the trends and the details of these three aspects should clarify some of the unattended questions that the Wageningen paper did not cover completely. So with that, we change gears and talk a little bit about the CEA industry as we are and current challenges. So plausible reasons for the status being as is, labor regulations, inter-country competition. That's something that needs to be taken care of and evaluated and examined properly, and other potential points for improvement that I've managed to learn by interacting with stakeholders through the ADVANCEA project. This project has been on the road for what, 2-3 years now, Cherry?
Correct.
Right, and in the marketing front of that project, I've managed to visit with stakeholders across the country, visited with consultants, producers, master growers, and learned a lot. So there is some additional points to consider, and I'm sharing that towards the end of this presentation. So quick outline, informal conversation, cafe kind of cafe style. Please interrupt me at any time if you want. So the study that we are talking about coming from Wageningen University is this. The QR code here leads you to the study if you are interested in reviewing yourself. So I'm not going to get in very specific details. I want to highlight certain points because of time limitations. So, but consider this study easy to find online, interesting material, but again, it leaves certain questions unattended that I hope we can cover in this conversation. So a quick summary of the Wageningen study. It opens up by saying that there is an increasing demand for greenhouses worldwide, primarily driven by governments trying to encourage local, safe, and sustainable food production. I kind of like this type of remarks. Just want to highlight that government doesn't eat anything, right? So people do. So consumers do. Consumers' preferences dictate what most companies do in the market, how they offer their products, what they produce, and so on and so forth. So the government can incentivize and motivate local consumption, but, well, in the end of the day, it's people. People and consumers matter most. Now, this study from Wageningen here is primarily interested in adding value to greenhouse construction companies. So it's not exactly highlighting the potential of the market here for investors or greenhouse producers. It's highlighting the potential for greenhouse construction companies. And the primary question they want to answer is, what are the locations with the highest potential for Dutch greenhouse developers to invest in? So I quite like the transparency and the clear-cut type of conversation that the Dutchies usually have. I find it very useful and practical. Now, the specific objective of this study to identify locations where greenhouse for greenhouse growth, for greenhouse conversion, and for greenhouse entry. All right, so certain countries that don't have the capabilities, don't have the know-how, don't have the usual, they don't usually grow crops using greenhouses. So where these constructors can enter. So that's the third element of their study. Now, the study is divided in 3 parts. I will highlight the 2 initial ones. Part 1, the study focuses in terms of area suitability for greenhouses, right? So it's a fairly easy analytical approach. It uses spatial analysis, so GIS-based data, ranging from climate factors, water factors, marketing and infrastructure factors, and miscellanea, what they call it, risk of earthquakes, electricity supply, so on. So fairly easy analytical approach, GIS-based data, so primary data that is already available from the start. Now, looking at the results they share, okay? Top 5 countries with the greatest potential for greenhouses. Again, keep in mind that they are trying to provide an answer to greenhouse constructors, right? And in their results, the USA figures in as a top country with the greatest potential, all right? And the map here on the side shows a couple of things. So the red circles represent the existing production. So ranging from 51 hectares to 1,500 hectares, all right? The size of the circle, that's what the size of the circle mean. Now, the green shade represents the highest potential for in terms of area suitability, okay? And the white means no to little potential, so ranging from green to orange to yellow and yellow, orange, and then white. So what I call your attention here is perhaps the first yellow flag I see in this study. Say, okay, well, you have this huge amount of potential in the Midwest here. Let's talk about Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, Illinois. So great potential, but very little existing production in place. Well, if we look at Mexico, also again, part of the results, right? The study highlights the country here, Mexico, demonstrating relatively little potential for mid-tech greenhouses. However, we see these huge amounts of existing production. So a little bit of counterintuitive for me reading this. Okay, we don't see potential in Mexico, but at the same time we see these huge amounts of production taking place, right? So the circles here in Mexico, I primarily pointing out to the Jalisco region, the Michoacan, Guanajuato, San Luis Potosí over here, Sonora up here. So interesting to see. The results. The study doesn't show much potential in Mexico, but at the same time we have this huge production in place. I find it kind of counterintuitive right there. Now the
Gil,
second. Go on, Chris.
Gil, if you back up 2 slides from this one, it's also quite interesting that if you look at where the largest greenhouses in the United States currently exist in terms of older footprints that have been there a long time, you have Western Texas and Arizona with the old Eurofresh facility, which is now Howlings and Nature Suite, as well as on the coastal regions, the old Howlings facility in California and the Howlings facility in Utah. So where we've had successful greenhouses go up, they're not even identifying those as areas to continue to build, which is interesting to me.
Interesting. Yeah. I'm with you there, Chris. Cool. Now let's jump into the second part of the study, market potential study, right? So the second half of the very same Weigen study. In this case here, they claim that they are weighting the country's suitability results using additional secondary data. And the secondary data cover production factors, consumption factors, import factors, macroeconomic factors, so on and so forth. And once again, the results here, top 10 countries with the highest market potential scores. And again, you have the United States figuring among the top 5 countries. And unfortunately, we see comments like, okay, since it is not easy to find explanation why a country has certain calculated outcome, text for each country were constructed. And I dig deeper to find the reasons why the results were as they are. And the explanation is a little bit vague, a little bit not a little bit frustrating to say. I said, okay, well, I think it would be nice for us to jump into this and see how we can collaborate. How can we complement Weigen's study here, and looking more specifically into the United States case to add value to this whole conversation. And that's what we did. That's what I'm bringing here next. As a summary, in my view, again, completely personal at this point, the report seems to overlook some critical elements. Long-term consumption trends that we are bringing next, in-country regulations that we are also exploring further here in today's talk, trading dynamics within regional trade agreement zones. This is critical, and that's, I think, one of the major aspects, especially here in North America. And presence or absence of in-country support agents, actors. And here we are talking about all types of agents or actors, including those responsible for doing the heavy lifting in the production floor. All right. So one aspect that
let's add one more thing there that I felt was overlooked, but it's probably a reality of why the article was written originally and how the U.S. kind of elevated itself. It was based on recent historical interest from investors, right? So there's a certain access to financial capital that influences the way that people look at these markets as well. And over the past 5, 7, 10 years, we've had a lot of investor interest in the United States, almost so where we don't have a lot of independently owned farms anymore. Pretty much everything is investor capital backed, which allows for a higher, let's say, investment per square meter. And that fits in with what exporters are looking for when building large-scale greenhouses.
Those are great points, Chris. And to complement that, so the study here, when we talk about highest potential, right? So it has, in my view, it has the miscommunication in terms of the trend. All right. So this potential for investments or potential for production is not a snapshot, right? So it's something that grows up, that changes dynamically over time. And what we are experiencing in the industry today is not a result of actions taking place yesterday or last year. Is an accumulation of facts that date from probably 2 or 3 decades ago. It didn't start yesterday. It's something that needs to be considered kind of in a more historical pattern that has led us to the status where we are now. Now, considering this dynamic, this trend aspect, this is what I bring next. So let's try to look at certain elements here. Starting from, if we consider the value chain approach, starting from the very end of this chain where the consumers matter, what they do matter. So here's a table that summarizes the demand for vegetables in the United States. And these numbers come from Mintel. Mintel is a private research agency, a research company, highly reputable company. And I like to highlight the trends, right? So over time, the compound annual growth rate for demand of vegetables in the country, 5.2%, growing 5.2% every year. But the projection moving forward is 2.2%. So the demand is still growing in terms of in value terms, right? In $1 billion. It's like considering that the size of the pie is growing over time, and it's from here on it's projected to grow 2.2%. That's the demand for vegetables in general. So all vegetables. So we are consuming 2024 numbers here. We are consuming approximately $60 billion worth of vegetables in the country, according to Mintel. Now, for fresh fruit, numbers are similar here. Projection moving forward comes the pie is going to grow 2.1%, consuming in 2023 here $49 billion worth of fruit. Again, the size the pie is growing 2.1%. Looking more specifically into tomatoes and strawberries, that are actually the two crops that were more that were considered in the Wageningen study. So how do we look? How does the United States look in terms of tomato consumption? So here we are, the retail sales for tomato for fresh tomatoes. I should have said fresh tomatoes here. Growing 4.2%. It grew 4.2% between 2018 2023, meaning that we are growing more or less the same rate as the demand for vegetables. So tomato alone accounts for approximately 10% of the vegetable retail sales in the United States and growing approximately the same rate. Now, strawberry seems to be a different story. We seem to have fast-paced growth in strawberry market. The pie is growing at a much faster pace, 9.4% a year. So interesting to consider that, right? So different crops, different stories, right? So it's very difficult to pack all crops in the same story here. Tomatoes and strawberries have very different projections moving forward as well. Now, switching gears, leaving the demand side and looking into production. This is how the production of fresh tomatoes look in the United States. And again, it didn't start yesterday, right? So it's a long-term process. Our ability to produce tomato has decreased considerably. We don't have here on the table on the right-hand side, but our production has decreased almost 2% every year since 1998. All right. So first point to consider, you have demand growing at a 4.2%, right? And production decreasing by almost 2%. So this is for fresh tomatoes in general. Now, USDA has finally helped us a little bit more and started distinguishing greenhouse tomatoes from open field tomatoes. And this is what we have here. The U.S. greenhouse tomato production grew approximately 4.6% a year. So this is the green shaded area here. 4.6% every year. So production, notice that first interesting interpretation here, our production greenhouse tomato is more or less aligned with the market growth. Okay. So market growth we had there 4.2%. Here we have 4.6% compound annual growth rate production of greenhouse tomatoes. However, as I keep saying, the consumer preferences are changing, right? And so basically we have the growth effect being taken care of by production growth. But then you have the substitution effect. Consumers are changing their preferences. They want packed tomatoes. They want flawless tomatoes. And most of that production can only be obtained through protected environments, right? So we have these the substitution effect that is not being taken care of by growth in production. So it's natural to consider this, right? So we have these two dynamic forces. You have the growth effect, you have the substitution effect. Well, if production is not taking care of the substitution effect, it must be coming from somewhere else. I've used this slide in many talks before. This is something that demonstrates that the U.S. has become a net importer of fresh vegetables and produce. And again, didn't start yesterday, something that has happened for the last several years, if not decades. Our import in terms of fresh vegetables and produce grows 6.1% every year. Compound annual growth rate, that's what we have here. Our exports is nearly the same, right? So some scholars like to talk about resilience, especially when shocks happen in supply. Basically, what this graph is showing is that we are becoming more and more dependable on international markets for fresh produce than ever before. Now, looking specifically at tomatoes, where do we stand? Our tomato imports has grown in the same, it's kind of a very similar pattern. So if for the whole vegetable and fresh produce, imports are growing 6.1%, tomato alone, 5.6% every year. It's like if our imports grow 5.6% every year for fresh tomato, for tomatoes in general, this is what this slide shows. Tomatoes, fresh tomatoes in general. Again, if we distinguish between greenhouse tomatoes and not and open field tomatoes. So what do we see now, 2023 numbers from the USDA, 65% of fresh tomatoes, fresh tomato imports are greenhouse grown. 65% is a hit. And this growth here, guys, this growth here represents, my calculations tell me, this growth represents 12.3% compound annual growth rate. It's like if our greenhouse tomato imports grew 12.3% every year. So again, production is taking care of the market, the growth effect, but the substitution effect is primarily taken care of by imports. In 2023 here, we imported 2.8 billion pounds of fresh tomato, greenhouse fresh tomatoes in 2023.
Gil, I know we don't have the slide here, but one of the things we might think about adding in the future might be if we look at the acres of greenhouse tomatoes grown in the United States and look at their trend line and then compare the increase in acreage of greenhouse grown tomatoes in Mexico and Canada. And you probably will see that the lines look very similar to here, where if you would have the blue representing US greenhouse grown tomatoes and the green representing Canadian and Mexican grown tomatoes, you would probably see trend lines that look very, very similar.
Right, right. And that comes back to the Weingen study, right? So we see the study indicates the potential, but actually production is taking place elsewhere.
Right.
Yeah. And one number that is also interesting to keep in mind, and this is a conversation that we've had before. In 2023, in a previous talk that I gave, greenhouse tomato was estimated to represent 43% of the total supply. Well, so we are beginning at 2025, looking at 2024 numbers. It's estimated that 55%, 54.9 to be precise, of the country's fresh tomato supply is greenhouse grown. Now, I like to keep looking at this number because it shows the effect of the substitution factor. So the substitution factor, the consumer preference, has a massive impact in our imports. Our consumers, the change of preferences cannot be neglected. So what do we have next? Just a slide to show that our exports represent a fraction of imports. U.S. tomato exports, basically, the amount here represents 7.2% in value terms compared to what we import. So in the other side of the border, Mexico tomato exports. So see how fast their export has grown. Again, Chris, we don't have the production, the Mexico production graph, but looking at a trend line in exports, Mexico has exported a growing amount in value terms that exports grows 6.3% every year. It's a massive, it's kind of the flip coin of the United States, pretty much, right? And when we put in perspective where our greenhouse tomatoes come from, so in the first part of the graph here is an average 2021, 2023, and then the middle portion here, 2011, 2013, and now 2021, 2023. You see how fast the Mexico supply grows in our market. So we are highly dependable on imports from Mexico. And again, this comes back to the Weingen study. Although they claim that the United States might have a huge potential, well, production is clearly taking place elsewhere, leading to growing exports into the United States from Mexico, from Canada. Now, the status of the CEA industry in the country. So here we have some numbers. I have a mix of numbers from USDA. recent reports from USDA and some of my own estimations through the work done the Advanced CEA project. So area of greenhouses dedicated to vegetable production in the United States, 1,236 hectares, right? Where California, Ohio, and Texas are the leading states with greenhouses. Again, the USDA does not distinguish high-tech, mid-tech, unfortunately. At least in this report that I used for these numbers, there is no distinction between high-tech or mid-tech greenhouses. Now, when we look specifically at greenhouse tomatoes, USDA estimates that the area dedicated to production, 637 hectares, okay? With California, Ohio, and Kentucky leading the charts. Aggregate sales from greenhouse tomato operations, $470 million. Estimated production, 763 million pounds of tomatoes. So if we make it clear, an easy computation here, USDA numbers would lead to approximately 62 cents per pound. That's the price. That would be the price paid to producer. Well, I must say that this is not high-tech greenhouse, right? This must be an aggregation that the USDA did to report these values, because if 62 cents per pound was the right price for this large-scale greenhouses that we see, most companies would be out of business by then. I mean, there's no way this price would be cost competitive for these companies. And my estimations, after running and discussing with stakeholders, here are some initial computations. Estimated average yield, 10.7 pounds per square foot, okay? An estimated average price paid to producer, 94 cents per pound. And still, this amount is very, very difficult to keep the head above the water. It has been very difficult for American growers and investors to maintain their operations at that value. But that's pretty much why we see the growth in production in the United States being just a fraction of growth in other countries like Mexico, for example. I must say that I have these emotional aspects when I look at these numbers. So we are talking about, so if we look at the estimated average yield, 10.7 pounds per square foot, and make some additional computations. So this is 40 pounds, over 40 pounds of fresh tomato per plant. This plant remains alive in production for over 9 months. So looking back 20 years ago, myself sitting on the benches of the agronomy school, if someone came to me and said, hey, you know what, in 20 years' time, we will be producing over 40 pounds of tomato from a single plant, I would not believe it. I said, hey, see how much we've grown. And it's kind of an emotional bad feeling to say, well, we are producing these huge amounts of fresh food with this high level of efficiency, and yet it's not economically feasible for several companies out there. So there is something very wrong in all of this. And the struggle is clear. I mean, companies are having a hard time, even with those computations, with those numbers, producing over 40 pounds per plant, being paid around 94 cents or even more sometimes, 94 cents per pound of tomato. And still, you see some companies. What we have in the screen here is a snapshot of the stocks of some companies. I omitted the numbers for, of course, for confidentiality reasons. But these are kind of public information. If you dig a little bit deeper, you find it. The stock prices for some of these companies, it started like a big fuss, understanding that, well, this is the future and so on and so forth. Now, stock price is just becoming a fraction of what they were. Here's another company. Here's a third.
Guil, can I interrupt you for a second so that we can get
go ahead, Chris, please.
some of these numbers? We have a couple of questions. Let's focus on the ones that lead to some of your numbers that you put. Neil Matson asks, is that production per plant or per stem? Usually a tomato on a rootstock is 2 stems per plant, somewhat higher densities in the summer. Neil, that's a great question. I'll let Gil ask how his interviews went to get those answers. But yeah, that is one of the things that is changing over the years. If we look at planting densities 15 years ago versus planting densities today, when you see the yields being reported at a higher and higher number, there's two things to keep in mind. Number one, what is the varieties that we're talking about? Is it a heavy, big variety tomato, or is it a lighter cocktail style tomato? That would go into that number. And then Tom Stencil asked, is 94 cents per pound an estimated revenue? And what would the cost of production in US versus Mexico be? So Gil, can you speak to either Neil's question about stems per plant or to cost in Mexico?
Sounds good. Great point. Thanks for interrupting me there. The computation pounds per plant is just my own, right? So it is not a standard measure in the industry, and I understand this doesn't communicate well. It depends on several operational decisions that the growers make. So a better unit would be either pounds per square foot or kilograms per square meter. And so I would just let the 40 pounds per plant aside, like being a kind of a way of communicating production to a naive audience. But if we become more technical, we should look into pounds per square foot or kilograms per square meter.
Yeah, let me then add one thing to close it on for the audience. And let's use an assumption, depending on the age of the greenhouse and the type of tomato being grown, let's use an assumption of 2.7 to 4.5 heads per square meter. So you've got your main stem, and then it's how many heads do you have per plant. So let's call that heads per square meter. And then Gil, on Tom's question about production cost in Mexico.
Well, this also very important point there. These are ongoing analysis, right? We don't have the final numbers for everything just yet. So in terms of cost of production, these are numbers that we're still working on. We are still refining them based on interviews and numbers coming from the interviews with stakeholders. So we don't have that final cost yet. But what I can share now is that this $94 per pound it leads to very, very tight margins in the United States. It's not something that keeps everybody with head above the water, and that's why we see the growth in production being as lean as it is, with several companies coming out of business, as I will show in the next set of slides.
And so let me then add a little bit more for Tom and anybody else that cares. Everything I'm about to say is simply anecdotal. If we look specifically at the tomato market, where we have 5 to 7 large marketing companies, mainly owned by Canadian companies, controlling the distribution of tomatoes to large retailers, it's been my experience that U.S. producers need to be producing at selling, let's say, at a price per pound or a price per kilo that is in line with what's being sold out of Mexico, out of Canada, in order to get the marketing companies to support them. So let's just say that there might be a small premium for locally grown at certain retailers, but in general, let's say that the goal for the marketing companies is to have the U.S. companies produce at a similar price point that is being done in Mexico and Canada, unless there's a distinctive added value that will provide them an increase in price per kilo.
Right.
Go ahead, Gil.
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks, Chris, for jumping into this. Now, as we were mentioning before, the struggle is clear for several companies with those that have open capital. We see that their stocks have become a fraction of what they originally were. And these are 4 companies in the controlled environment agriculture. And at the same time, we come across from time to time with news, unfortunate news about companies coming out of business, either vertical farming or controlled environment agriculture companies. Bowery being one of the most recent bankruptcies, and a couple of days ago, we also saw this news from Bloomberg mentioning that Bezos' Plenty company, a vertical farming company operating out of South San Francisco, California, having its value cut by this equity value cut by 90%. So this is how we are playing this game. This is how the industry looks like now. So the struggle is real, and here are some hypothetical reasons for this struggle that we see. Potential hypothetical reasons. Mathematical error in the investment plan. I don't want to believe in that. Emphasis on technology and revenue generation capacity other than produce. Perhaps they have a proof of concept to make, demonstrating that revenue generation can come from elsewhere other than the produce. Ambitious revenue generation projections that never took place. Limited understanding of the regulatory environment, limited access to supporting supply chain actors and agents, as I mentioned before, towards the beginning of this talk. Now, I don't want to believe in the first element of finance. There are plenty of very smart people doing investment analysis out there. I don't think people have done huge mathematical errors leading companies out of business. I don't think this is acceptable. I don't think this is happening. Now, emphasis on technology and revenue generation capacity other than produce. Question mark there. We hear rumors of companies that are trying to demonstrate their equity value through different revenue streams, potential revenue streams that never took place. But we don't know. We cannot prove. We don't have numbers to support those types of statements. Now, ambitious revenue generation that never took place. This is something plausible. The other the bullet points 4 and 5 also plausible reasons. I'd like to explore further today labor regulations and inter-county.
Gil, just so we can have a fun conversation, if you go back one slide, I would like to say that there were mathematical errors in the investment plans.
Oh, wow. All right.
Like to say that is highly plausible. And it's not that the math was wrong. And it's one of the reasons Gil and I wanted to do this presentation. It's that the assumptions were wrong. So if you create a business plan where your assumptions are that you're going to get a certain price per pound, or your assumption is that your yields are going to be at a certain amount per square foot or per square meter, then those assumptions are going to lead to inaccurate investment plans. And you know, that's where I would say, let's not completely discredit that one, but let's bring it up for conversations. So go on.
I like it, Chris. Good point. Yeah. Well, putting that way, yes, it would be plausible. If we don't get the projections right, it can be very, very problematic for the investment analysis. Now, I want to highlight this aspect when it comes to labor regulations. So some people don't understand this. I think it is important for all of us to have a clear picture of this, right? Again, out of my travels and discussions with companies out there, some preliminary numbers that I'm bringing here to you guys. Greenhouse plus packing house labor accounts for approximately between 31 and 40% of production costs in the United States, okay? Most common number of ground level employees ranging from 5 to 8 persons per hectare. And again, this includes 5 to 8 includes greenhouse plus packing house. Consider that the packing house is dimensioned. The dimension of the packing house is is equivalent to the need for that greenhouse, of course. So between 5 and 8 persons per hectare. Now, U.S. costs related to personnel. So just a couple of numbers to illustrate this analysis, this computation that I'm about to show you. The Ohio minimum wage for agricultural workers, $9.30 per hour. Okay, so companies out there, especially the CEA companies, cannot rely on domestic workers alone. There's a shortage of labor. We know that. So most companies end up relying on the H-2A program to hire immigrant workers to meet their work requirements. And yet, some companies still struggle to find eligible H-2A workers, all right? Meaning that even with the H-2A program in place, there is still shortage of labor. Some companies still, then they end up having to pay some extra hours for these employees, leading their production costs even higher. Now, the H-2A wage rate in Ohio, $19.57 per hour, okay? So keep in mind that on top of that value, companies still need to outsource recruiting and hiring. So companies, the production companies don't have the capability to do that themselves. So they end up outsourcing recruiting and hiring to third-party companies, which leads to approximately $64.46 per hour. This is the H-2A rate. Notice that this amount is twice as much the Fair Labor Standards Act wage, which is the $9.30 per hour. So very, very difficult, very, very different aspect here. And it's important.
Let's make sure that everybody clearly heard that the other thing with using local ag workers at $9.30 per hour is that in greenhouse environments or in indoor growing environments, those facilities have a tendency to hire anywhere between 2 and 4 times more people per hectare to get the same amount of work done. So that's the other thing that always needs to be considered, is that at $9.30 an hour, you're unlikely to be managing your farm at 5 to 8 people per hectare.
Good. Yeah, well, this is some my rounds of conversation didn't get. Thanks for bringing that up, Chris. But one additional point that I have here in the slide, the law states that if the employer hires H-2A workers because of equity and fairness, whatever that might be, all employees must be paid the same amount. So say we are a company, we want to complement our workforce with immigrant workers, we have to abide by the rules. And in Ohio, we would be paying $19.57 per hour, plus recruiting, plus additional costs there, leading to approximately $24.46. Well, if we have a part of our labor force being paid at that rate, everybody else also needs to be paid that rate, even if they are domestic workers, right? So that leads our labor costs way higher, even if we manage to hire some domestic guys to do the work. Now, just for a matter of comparison, the country average wage for skilled greenhouse employees, that is 82 pesos per hour. That's equivalent to $4.05 per hour. So plus social benefits and extras, let's say we are talking about $5.50 per hour for the Mexican employer, okay, the greenhouse Mexican company. Well, quick computation, this amount is estimated at 47% of the Ohio minimum wage, or estimated at 22% of the prevailing wage for H-2A workers. and therefore for all labor costs. So notice the gap only in labor, the difference between countries here. And of course, when we factor in the exchange rate, right, considering that most of the production taking place in Mexico is to be sold to the United States, this is the gap we are facing currently in the labor market for greenhouse workers. Just a quick simulation, and again, I mentioned this. These are all working preliminary studies that we are conducting through the ADVANCEA study. If this is not happening, is not on the radar, but this is if the H2A wage was going to be equivalent to the Fair Act wage, that's the US minimum wage. If we could make those two wages equivalent, the impact would be massive. Total cost of production in the US greenhouse tomato sector would be estimated to reduce between 15.5 and 21.7%. So this is a reduction in cost of production just by changing this wage, all right? So fair to say that this is a relatively thick gap in production costs that we are facing right now due to the labor regulations, the present labor regulations. All right.
And right now, there's lots of conversations in the chat bar about cost per hour, rates per hour at individual states that everybody can look at, as well as Tom Stenzel made the comment, and Tom is the director of the CEA Alliance, that this is something that is being discussed on the Hill, but this is not something that's not moving quickly, and it's hard work to get done. So there's lots of comments in there. I'll let everybody read them as they can.
All right. I know that we are approaching the hour here. I just want to highlight another couple of points out of my discussions with stakeholders, with industry players. So besides labor, right? So what are other strategies that greenhouse producers are considering or actually making in an attempt to reduce their costs and become feasible, remain feasible, I should say. So potential points for improvement in the U.S. Greenhouse sector. First, portfolio management. That doesn't necessarily apply to the tomato sector, but in several other CEA sectors, we see the old operator being very emotional about the SKUs that they produced back in the days. Well, it is very important to remain rational in portfolio management. Certain elements, certain production units, certain SKUs that they used to produce in the past are not cost effective anymore. So rationality is very important there. Some companies need to look at their product portfolio very, very carefully and examine whether or not there are opportunities of shrinking that and therefore reducing costs. Another very important point that came to my attention in these conversations, an opportunity here is paying closer attention to the packing house. Very often we see investors and master growers being very detailed about production aspects taking place at the greenhouse, but paying limited attention to what happens at the packing house. Well, the packing house employs a lot of people, and if we don't have the operations management in place, that can be very problematic. Not to mention liability issues, especially in peak season, eventual accidents that might happen with forklifts and personnel running around in a non-organized fashion. So one point of encouragement here is pay close attention to what happens at the packing house. Consider low-hanging fruit investments for the packing house. There are several types of mechanical equipment already available for packing house automation that might reduce labor costs quite significantly. Again, we are conducting some analysis on that matter. We don't have numbers to share, but out of my rounds of conversations, it seems that the packing house is kind of the ugly sheep, the black sheep in the. So we like to talk about production aspects in the greenhouse. We don't like to talk much about the packing house, but it's important to do so. Another thing that we've seen, marketing and sales strategies, some companies leaving behind marketing costs and trying to sell, just produce and sell private label to large-scale groceries. That way, some companies claim that they are reducing and maintaining marketing costs at a minimum, not investing in brand equity very much, just focusing on production as a strategy to reduce the marketing and administrative costs to a minimum. Also I found it interesting. I found it useful to share with you guys other decisions that companies are making out there in terms of trying to keep their head above the water in these difficult times. And another thing that we've come across is risk sharing contracts. Interesting to see the CEA industries is starting to picking up these contracts that are more common in row crops. They were studied and discussed quite extensively back in the days in row crops. In the CEA, we now start seeing some contracts, some risk-sharing contracts between the producer, the CEA operator, and the technology provider, where the technology provider and the operator team up to share risks and share equity. And something that is not common in the CEA industry is also a contract that could potentially take place, risk sharing between the operator and the buyer. Not as common because most of our buyers are large-scale retailers, but is something to consider that has happened in the past in row crops, especially in grain crops and so on. Now, this is my last slide. I wanted to share some of these learning points with you all, and also highlight that we need to look at these aspects from a kind of a long-term historical trend perspective. What we are facing today in the CEA industry is not the result of decisions we made yesterday. It is a historical fact. Understanding the trends, understanding the problems over time actually leads to a much more comprehensive, compelling story.
And I'll just close out, and there was a couple other questions about different crops. When we're looking at using data from third parties, tomatoes is a much easier crop to look at because it is the largest crop in the CEA sector, and it does have the most historical data that we can reference. Questions about lettuce, that is a newer crop where it's only been in recent years that we've seen large scale production, so we don't have as much historical data. The overall area of lettuce being grown is much smaller than what it is for greenhouse vine crops, tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers. And so it makes getting some of the data in this fashion a little bit more difficult. Even though hydroponic lettuce has been grown for years, up till a handful of years ago, it was mainly done by small independent family farms on small plots. So it makes capturing some of the data a little bit more difficult. And I'm happy to take any of those conversations offline where the listener agrees that everything I share with them is anecdotal based on my experience and not based on something I can reference from the USDA or a third party.
Another point there, Chris, it must be said, through the ADVANCEA project, we have had much more cooperation coming from tomato growers or vine crop growers, I should say, compared to leafy greens, unfortunately. We are eager to talk and discuss and dig deeper into the leafy greens challenges as well. We just haven't had much of open doors there. So this project is ongoing. It doesn't end, it's not going to end in 2025. We still have a couple of years. So if the audience here is willing to collaborate and help us figure out and discuss the status of the leafy green sector in depth, please reach out. Let's collaborate. It will be wonderful to pay you guys a visit and share experiences.
Thank you so much, Gil, and then also Chris. Wonderful presentation. We exceeded a few minutes over the hour, but I didn't want to interrupt you guys because discussion was going at the same time. But I need to stop recording and then conclude today's cafe. And then thank you again for sharing your thoughts, analysis, and experience and vision for the future. So thank you very much. Everyone, thank you so much again. Happy New Year.
Thank you, Gil. Thank you, Chris.
Bye, guys. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.